The opening of your story begins with a question many people have carried in silence for years. You've been waiting for a dramatic sign, something impossible to ignore, believing that when God finally speaks, it will come like thunder breaking through the sky. But what if that expectation has caused you to overlook the quiet ways He has been working all along? What if His presence has never been absent, but simply different from what you imagined? Sometimes the greatest changes begin so gently that we don't recognize them until we look back and realize our lives have already started moving in a new direction. 5. The voice throughout this message reminds us that God often moves like the wind. You cannot always see where the wind begins or where it is going, yet you know it is real because it bends the trees, stirs the grass, and fills your lungs with breath. In the same way, His presence cannot always be measured by dramatic moments or visible miracles. It quietly changes hearts, restores strength, and leads people forward long before they understand how it happened. That is why the silence you have been living through should never be mistaken for abandonment. Only felt empty because you were searching for loud confirmation while God was already working in places your eyes could not yet see. Even in the moments when heaven seemed quiet, and His hand had never left your life. The question that has echoed through your heart for so long deserves an honest answer. If God has truly been good, why has that goodness often been so difficult to recognize? Before answering, the message pauses to acknowledge the hidden burdens so many people carry every day. God sees the family gathered around a table where the food feels smaller than the stack of unpaid bills waiting nearby. He sees the parent calculating expenses over and over again, hoping the numbers will somehow change, and he notices the worker who lies awake already worrying about tomorrow's shift before today has even ended. None of those quiet struggles have escaped his attention. He also remembers the nights no one else witnessed, the prayers that slowly became shorter because exhaustion replaced words, the friendships that quietly faded without explanation. The heaviness that settled into your heart after disappointment became familiar. Through every lonely evening and every silent tear, he never walked away. What looked like distance was never disappointment. That difference changes everything. A disappointed father waits with folded arms, expecting an explanation before offering comfort. But the picture presented here is entirely different. God is described as the Father who is already moving toward the chair where you sit, meeting you in your weakness long before you can explain yourself. His love has never depended on perfect performance. His compassion arrives before your excuses ever do. The message then turns to another struggle that often goes unnoticed. Some mornings, the weight is already waiting before your feet even touch the floor. Nothing terrible happened overnight, yet an invisible heaviness settles over your spirit, and you push through the day because you believe there is no other choice. You pour another cup of coffee, force yourself to keep moving, and hope tomorrow feels different, but that heaviness is not presented as proof that God has rejected you. Instead, it is described as the soul longing for the living water it was created to receive. What feels like punishment is actually an invitation to return to the one who alone can satisfy the deepest thirst inside the human heart. The ache itself is not your enemy. It is a reminder that your spirit was designed for something greater than simply surviving another day. The script then recalls seasons of painful failure that many viewers will immediately recognize. There were times when every plan seemed wise at the beginning, yet still collapsed before reaching the shore. You invested your effort, trusted the advice available, and watched everything begin to sink while no one was able to rescue you. Even after the financial loss faded, the shame remained, and the opinions of others seemed harder to forget than the failure itself. Yet the most important part of that story was not the failure. It was the decision to return. You came back without achievements to display, without polished explanations, and without anything left to bargain with. Your hands were empty, but those empty hands were exactly what God had been waiting to fill. The quiet humility that brought you back became the turning point. Even if you did not recognize it at the time, there is another quality that often goes unnoticed by everyone around you. When discouragement becomes overwhelming, you choose not to pour your pain onto the people you love. Instead, you carry that burden privately and bring it before God. Rather than allowing bitterness to spread through your relationships, you have learned to whisper your brokenness into His presence. According to this message, that is not weakness at all. It is evidence that your character has been quietly shaped through suffering in ways you could never see while you were living through it. The reason God's goodness can feel so difficult to recognize is not because it is absent, but because many people have unknowingly learned to look for it in the wrong places. From an early age, life teaches us that blessing should be loud, immediate, and impossible to question. We begin believing that God's favor must appear as public success, overflowing bank accounts, impressive titles, or victories that silence everyone who ever doubted us. Without realizing it, we start measuring His love by things the world can easily admire. But the message gently challenges that way of thinking. God's work has never depended on making a public display of His power in every season. Instead, He often works quietly, transforming a person's heart long before changing their circumstances. While the world celebrates visible achievements, He is shaping character, restoring hope, and rebuilding lives in ways that cannot always be photographed or explained. The contrast becomes even clearer when we look at those who build their identity around possessions and recognition. Some people use wealth, status, or influence to make others feel smaller, believing that louder success automatically proves greater worth. Yet the message warns that gifts become destructive when they are used as weapons instead of blessings. What appears impressive from a distance often hides emptiness that eventually consumes the person holding it. God explains that you were never created to compete in that kind of race. Your identity belongs to something far older and far deeper than public approval. His purpose for your life cannot be measured by applause, because the most valuable work He does usually happens where no audience is watching. While others chase recognition, He is quietly building a foundation that cannot be shaken by success or failure. The message then reveals another lie that often settles into the human heart. Many people secretly believe their past mistakes define who they are. They carry an invisible record of every failure, replaying old regrets again and again, convinced that no real blessing can arrive until somehow the past is repaired. The burden becomes heavier because the person keeps reopening wounds that God has already chosen to heal. Here the message offers a powerful reminder. God declares that the sins He has already forgiven are no longer being counted against you. Heaven is not keeping the record that you continue reading to yourself. When forgiveness has already been given, constantly reliving old failures only keeps you chained to a sentence that has already been cancelled. Your worst season was never meant to become your permanent identity. To make this truth more personal, the narration turns to an ordinary moment many people know well. You open your phone and compare two columns, what you owe and what you have. The difference between those numbers feels overwhelming, almost as if your value could somehow be calculated by a financial statement. After staring at the screen, you close it and continue preparing dinner. carrying the weight of that invisible pressure into another evening. But the message insists that those numbers never tell the whole story. Financial seasons are real, yet they cannot define your identity or determine your worth. They describe only one chapter, not the entire journey. Just as the seasons of nature eventually change, difficult seasons in life also move forward, carried by a wind you cannot control but can learn to trust. The narration then turns toward another temptation that quietly appears whenever the heart grows thirsty. Instead of running toward God, people often search for quick substitutes. Approval from others, endless scrolling through a screen late at night, flattering words from someone who barely knows you, or constant distractions may offer temporary relief, but they never satisfy the deeper hunger inside the soul. These substitutes promise comfort while leaving people emptier than before. They can distract the heart for a moment, but they cannot heal what is truly broken. The message makes it clear that this is not spoken as condemnation. Instead, it is a compassionate warning from a father who knows you are growing tired of pretending that temporary solutions can replace lasting peace. As your life begins to change, there will always be voices ready to create doubt. Some will insist that if God were truly blessing you, the results would already be obvious. Others will suggest your prayers failed because you lacked enough faith or somehow missed an important step. Those voices attempt to lead you back into the same uncertainty that has already caused so much pain. The message urges you not to return to that familiar sea of doubt. Instead, remain close to the place where God's voice can still be heard clearly. His word is described as far more than information. Like seeds planted deep in the soil, his promises gradually remove old lies while growing new life inside a person's heart, often long before outward circumstances begin to change. Finally, the narration invites you to lay down the measuring stick you have been using for so many years. God's goodness was never designed to impress crowds or satisfy every skeptic. It reveals itself through quiet peace, growing wisdom, unexpected hope, genuine rest, and the gentle transformation taking place within you. Before the world ever notices a change on the outside, God is already breathing new life into the inside, and that quiet work has been happening all along. The message now shifts your attention away from the loud signs you have been waiting for and towards something much quieter, yet infinitely more essential. It reminds you that God's presence has been with you all along, not as thunder shaking the sky, but as the very breath sustaining your life. Breath is easy to overlook because it is constant, but without it nothing else matters. In the same way, God's faithfulness often works silently, strengthening you long before you realize how much you have already changed. Rather than searching for dramatic proof, the message invites you to notice the small mercies that quietly appear in ordinary life. The wisdom to make a calm decision instead of reacting in panic, a full night's sleep after weeks of anxiety, or the gentle return of hope after believing it had disappeared forever are not insignificant moments. They are evidence that God is already moving, shaping your heart before he reshapes your circumstances. This is not presented as a promise that every problem will disappear overnight. Instead, the message emphasizes that even before visible answers arrive, you are already being carried by a Father who refuses to leave your side. His work often begins within the heart, building peace, patience, and strength before anyone else can see the changes taking place. The pattern may remain hidden for a while, but his presence never does. You are then invited to pause in the middle of your busy thoughts. Relax your jaw, breathe slowly, and notice how tightly you have been holding yourself together. Many people spend their lives bracing for the next disappointment without realizing how exhausted they have become. The simple act of breathing deeply becomes a reminder that God has never stopped sustaining you, even through seasons when your heart expected another painful blow. The message explains that there is no need to force an emotional experience or manufacture a spiritual feeling. You do not have to chase extraordinary moments to know that God is near. Instead, stop scanning the horizon for dramatic evidence and recognize the quiet presence already surrounding you. See, He is closer than the difficult decision you have been avoiding and nearer than the worries that have filled your thoughts for so long. From there, the story reaches back to the beginning of creation. The same God who formed humanity from the dust breathed life into the first person, turning lifeless clay into a living soul. That breath has never lost its power through the centuries. And the message declares that it continues to sustain every life He has created. Each breath you take is another reminder that His faithfulness has not run dry. The narration then challenges a distorted picture of God that many people unknowingly carry. Some imagine Him as a distant ruler constantly keeping score, carefully recording every mistake before deciding whether their prayers deserve an answer. Others see Him as someone who reluctantly gives blessings while focusing mainly on failures. The message firmly rejects that image, declaring it was never an accurate picture of God's heart. Instead, it reminds you that false ideas about God are often learned through painful experiences or incomplete understanding. Sometimes they come from people who genuinely loved you but did not fully understand Him themselves. Other times they came from individuals who used religion to control through fear rather than reveal His compassion. Whatever their source, those images do not represent the Father speaking throughout this message. The message then speaks directly to your identity. You are described not as someone desperately trying to earn acceptance, but as a son or daughter of the Creator who holds the universe together. The God who stretched out the heavens has also placed something valuable within you. That gift was not given because you finally became impressive enough to deserve it, but because years of suffering have quietly shaped a heart humble enough to receive it without pride. One of the most powerful ideas presented here is that suffering itself has prepared you for this moment. The hardships you believed had disqualified you actually emptied your hands of self-reliance. While pride leaves little room for God's work, humility creates space for His grace. The very experiences you wished had never happened became part of the process that opened your heart to receive what He wanted to give. After encouraging viewers to respond if the message has spoken to them, the narration introduces a scene from Scripture. It takes us to a quiet rooftop at night where Jesus met privately with a respected religious teacher named Nicodemus. This was not a conversation held before crowds or celebrated in public. It unfolded in the darkness, where a man known for his knowledge finally admitted that something essential was still missing from his life. Nicodemus had built his reputation on understanding God's law and carefully following every rule. By every visible standard, he appeared successful and spiritually accomplished. Yet despite everything he knew, he sensed there was a deeper reality he could neither explain nor experience. And that quiet hunger led him to seek Jesus away from the eyes of everyone who respected him. The message explains that Jesus responded to Nicodemus with remarkable gentleness because he understood the burden hidden beneath his confidence. The peace he offered was not inexpensive or casual. It would ultimately be purchased through His own suffering, His sacrifice, His death, and His resurrection. That is why the invitation being extended is presented as completely free to those who receive it. Even though it came at an immeasurable cost to the one offering it, the same hand that gave life to the first human breath is still present with you today. Tarment. The breath entering your lungs in this moment is not ordinary or meaningless. It is a reminder that the Creator who formed humanity from dust is still the one sustaining you through every season, every struggle and every unanswered question. The same source of life that began the story of mankind has not stopped carrying your story forward. You are not the child of a distant and anxious ruler who counts every mistake and decides whether you deserve another chance. You are not standing before a God who keeps a record of failures and waiting for another reason to turn away. That image of God with a cold expression and a closed heart was never the true picture of who He is. Many people grow up carrying a distorted understanding of God. Sometimes those ideas come from painful experiences, sometimes from people who misunderstood His character, and sometimes from those who used His name in ways that created fear instead of love. But the message reminds us that fear and rejection were never the foundation of God's relationship with His children. You are a son. You are a daughter. You belong to the one who created everything that exists. The God who holds the universe together has placed something valuable and meaningful inside you, not because you finally achieved perfection, but because your journey through pain, failure, and restoration has shaped your heart in ways you may not yet understand. The message explains that suffering, although painful, can sometimes create a humility that success never could. Pride often leaves no room to receive because it believes it already has everything it needs. But suffering can empty a person's hands, creating space for grace, compassion, and a deeper dependence on God. The very experiences you believe disqualified you may have actually prepared you to receive something greater. The broken places, the moments of disappointment, and the seasons where you felt forgotten were not proof that your life was over. They became part of the process that shaped your ability to receive God's love with open hands. This is why the message asks you to stop measuring yourself only by what can be seen. The world often values achievements, appearances, and visible success, but God sees deeper than what people can observe. He sees the battles you fought privately, the patience you developed, and the strength that grew quietly when nobody was watching. The message then returns to the idea of the wind. You cannot capture the wind in your hands, yet you know it exists because you can see what it changes. You recognize it through movement, the trees bending, the grass shifting, and the cool air touching your face. In the same way, God's work may not always be visible immediately, but its effects reveal His presence. This truth was revealed during a nighttime conversation between Jesus and a respected teacher who had spent his life understanding religious laws. He was someone who knew the rules, understood traditions, and appeared to have everything figured out. Yet despite all his knowledge, something inside him remained unsettled. He came quietly because he did not want others to know that he had questions. The man who had spent years answering the questions of others now carried a hunger that knowledge alone could not satisfy. He sensed that something deeper was happening, something that could not be explained only through rules, achievements, or human understanding. He wanted an explanation he could measure. He wanted a formula that could be followed, a clear system that would allow him to understand exactly how everything worked. But instead of giving him another list of instructions, Jesus pointed him towards something he could never control. The movement of the Spirit, like the wind itself. The message explains that spiritual life does not arrive according to human calculations. It cannot be controlled like a schedule or earned like a reward. It comes from a source beyond human ability, moving freely and reaching people in ways they often cannot predict. The teacher had spent his entire life trying to qualify himself through knowledge and obedience. But Jesus showed him that the life God offers is not something people achieve through perfect performance. It is something they receive through surrender and openness. This is the same struggle many people experience today. They search for evidence that they are loved, are constantly trying to prove they are worthy enough. They keep looking for a sign they can display, a result they can measure, or an achievement that finally convinces them they matter. But the message reminds us that God's greatest work often begins in places where human measurement fails. Like the wind, his presence cannot always be controlled or predicted, but it can be experienced. The invitation is not to capture the wind, but to recognize when it is moving. The message returns to the simple but powerful truth that has been repeated throughout this journey. You have been searching for proof in places where God never promised to place it. You have been looking for something visible enough to convince everyone around you, something that could silence every doubt and answer every question. But the goodness of God does not always arrive as a public announcement. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a gentle wind moving through a field, changing everything without demanding attention. The wind cannot be held in your hands, yet you know when it is there. You may not see where it begins or where it ends, but you see the evidence of its movement. The grass bends, the leaves shake, and the air touches your face. In the same way, God's work in your life may not always appear in the form of immediate answers, but the evidence can be found in the ways your heart has changed, the strength you discovered, and the hope that returned when you thought it was gone. The message reminds you that God never promised a life without difficulty. He never promised that every loss would immediately be restored, or that every person who walked away would return with an apology. Instead, the promise was something much deeper. His presence would remain with you through every season. The one who began a good work in you would continue shaping you until that work was complete. The peace God gives is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It is a peace that exists even while circumstances are still being repaired. It protects the heart during uncertainty and reminds you that failure, delay, and difficult seasons do not have the power to separate you from the love that has already found you. The story returns once again to the image of the man who came to Jesus at night. He was a respected teacher who knew the laws, understood religious traditions, and believed he had carefully measured what was right and wrong. Yet, despite knowing so much, he discovered that knowledge alone could not satisfy the hunger inside his soul. He came searching for answers because something within him recognized that there was more than rules and achievements. He wanted to understand what God was truly doing, but he was still trying to approach spiritual life the same way he approached everything else, by measuring, calculating, and proving himself worthy. Instead of giving him another system to follow, Jesus pointed him toward the mystery of the wind. The message explains that spiritual life is not something humans can control like a formula. It is something received through surrender, through trusting the movement of God even when the destination is not completely visible. The wind moves freely. It cannot be commanded by human effort, and it cannot be trapped inside human expectations. Same way, God's work often happens beyond our ability to predict or organize. That does not make it less real. In many ways, it reveals something greater than anything we could create ourselves. The teacher had spent his life trying to earn what could only be received. He believed the answer was found in doing more, achieving more, and maintaining a perfect record. But Jesus showed him that true transformation begins when a person opens their hands and allows God to work. This same lesson applies today. Many people are exhausted because they are constantly trying to prove they are worthy of love. They carry the pressure of becoming someone impressive enough, successful enough, sound, or perfect enough to finally feel accepted. But the message reminds them that God's love was never a reward for perfection. It was a gift offered before they could ever earn it. So the invitation is simple. Stop gripping so tightly. Open your hands. Allow yourself to receive instead of constantly trying to achieve. Like someone waiting for rain, you do not need to force the clouds to move. You only need to be ready when the water comes. The next time you find yourself searching through your life for evidence that God is good, pause for a moment. Take a breath and remember that the very air entering your lungs is already a reminder of His care. The breath you often ignore is connected to the same breath described as bringing life into humanity from the beginning. That breath is not accidental. It is a quiet reminder that life itself is a gift. Even in seasons when you feel forgotten, the fact that you are still here means your story is not finished. The message ends by reminding you that you are not defined by your failures, your losses, or the seasons that broke your confidence. You are not the worst thing you have done or the hardest moment you have survived. Those experiences may have shaped you, but they do not have the authority to name you. The very struggles you believed had disqualified you may have created the humility and openness needed to receive something greater. Pain can empty our hands, but sometimes empty hands are exactly what allow us to receive. So when you feel the temptation to demand another sign, another confirmation, or another piece of evidence, remember the lesson of the wind. You do not need to capture it to know it exists. You only need to notice what it is moving, the quiet peace returning to your heart, the strength to continue when you thought you had nothing left, the ability to forgive yourself, the desire to hope again. These are not meaningless moments. They are signs of movement. And one day, perhaps in an ordinary moment you never expected, you may realize something has changed. You are no longer constantly demanding proof that God is near because you have learned to recognize His presence in the quiet. The wind was moving all along. The breath was there all along. The Father was closer than you ever imagined, and the goodness you were searching for was never missing. It was simply working in a way you had not yet learned to see.